Good morning. It's good to be here today. Just a quick introduction. I'm Ken Patterson. I'm area manager out of LeGrand. Been with ODOT for a little over 25 years. In my career with ODOT, I've been in a few different roles. I came on board as a winter seasonal driving snowplow with an economics degree. Quickly became a tech center employee. Did right-of-way work for about 11, 12 years. And then I did project delivery, through now in my current career. So I was a project leader for a number of years, and then I've been an area manager for the last 2.5 years. So I've got a passion around project delivery, and I'm really glad that we're here today to talk about, the life cycle of the project and build that understanding of our, delivery processes and each individual part of it. And so I'm glad to be here with Jim to help, present about the DAP.
And I'm Jim West. I'm the Tech Center Manager for Region 2. I've been with ODOT about 5 years. I did spend a little more than 20 years as a consultant. And as a consultant, the last 15 years or so, I did mostly work on Native American gaming facilities, big box retail, and shopping centers. And so that was a very interesting line of work, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation.
Okay. So our first slide here is I got a question for everybody. What is DAP? So how many people have heard DAP is 30% design? How many people have heard that it's 70% design? How many have heard that it's setting kind of a footprint for the project? How many have heard it's just whatever you have on the date that it's due? Okay? Okay. So there's a lot of things that can happen with DAP, but it's really important. I got a few pictures up here. I was trying to think about what's DAP mean to me. I mean, I know what the answer is because we're going to talk about it. But as the area manager, is it the financial black hole there, all that cash going into the black hole? Is it, the project initiation, moving to design? Is it time to release the hounds? That's when you put the resources of the project team out on the project and start working on it. Or is it the Chuck Norris seal of approval that when you're done, you got something to move forward with? So I think any of those can be kind of appropriate. We're going to be here today to talk a little bit about the definition and the purpose of the DAP, when the DAP occurs in the life cycle of the project, what quality control occurs at DAP. We'll talk about the DAP certification process, and as everyone's aware with PDII, that's changing a little bit. And so we're kind of in this funny time of carrying forward our practices that we're doing now and then switching to a new process for that. And then what occurs after DAP, so where it fits in the life cycle.
So I'm happy to be sharing the podium with Ken today. Just to let you know, I hope you're paying close attention because at the conclusion of our presentation, there'll be a short 50-question quiz. And for those of you who get 80% or greater, you get to have lunch. So DAP. DAP, you can see where it falls on the racetrack. It's after project initiation. And basically, this is the point where we're really trying to make sure we understand the project, that we're trying to set the footprint. And when we talked about, is it 30%, is it 70%, it's really not a percent. It's a level of design that you get to where you have a high level of confidence that the project footprint, the scope, schedule, and budget are not going to change going forward. And in some cases, it might be about a 30% design. Maybe it's a really simple project, maybe that's 30%. But most of our projects are more complex. And so it's going to be something greater than that. It could be 50, 60, 70% in order to be able to really understand what's happening on the project. So let me ask a couple of questions. How many of you have had to redo work because something on the project changed? Raise your hand. Quite a few hands. How many people think or feel like that costs the project money? Okay. How many think that that's a good use of public funds? Okay. I mentioned that I used to do a lot of work on casinos. Many of these were financed by casinos out of Las Vegas. And on those projects, it was really common to go to a PDT meeting the following week and have it announced that something significant had changed on the project. Oh, we raised the elevation of the project pad by a foot, and you're trying to design the road out in front. You know, or we moved all the driveways. And it was very common to redesign those projects 3 or 4 times. And at the time, I'd say, man, this is an enormous waste of money. But they seemed to have an endless amount of money. And I was a consultant, so I was more than happy to get a contract or get an extra services change order and just keep on designing. The trouble is here, we're a public agency, and we don't have an endless supply of money. We have a fixed amount of money. And so we need to be able to do it once and to do it right. So it's a critical point in the design process that we need to get to, which is DAP. And as we said, it's really to have enough design to be able to have a high degree of confidence that your footprint's not going to change. And so you're essentially establishing those geometric boundaries for the project. And you need to think not just where you're working on the project, but sometimes there's other elements of the project that may be located somewhere else. And so you have to keep that in mind as you move forward to DAP. And once you get to DAP, then it allows other activities to begin, which include buying right-of-way, permitting, getting environmental permits and other permits, and starting your construction documents. That's your plans, specs, and estimates. And so until you get to DAP, you really have a great idea of the footprint of the project. You don't want to start those other activities. Otherwise, if something changes, you get to redo work. Okay, one of the things that also occurs at DAP is you've got the design far enough along that you can start having conversations with others. So there may be other stakeholders that are interested. It may be a city, a county, or just the neighbors. And so you've got enough of the design prepared that you can now have that conversation. They can see, they can start to visualize what this project wants to look like and how it may affect them, where you can start to get input and make sure that you're on the right track and that you haven't overlooked some sort of fatal flaw. If you're looking for information on DAP, there are a couple of really great sources. One is the Operational Notice PDO2, and in there it covers more than just DAP, but it talks about DAP as it is today. And some of the elements that you would typically find in a DAP document and the things that have to be completed in order to be able to say you're at DAP. Another location for good information is the Project Delivery Guide, which is a fairly new document. I think that came out 2017, I believe, 2017, 2018. So if you haven't had a chance to look through that document, I'd encourage you to take a look. That's another place that you can find information. When we talk about establishing the footprint of the project, we're really talking about the area of potential impact. And there are a number of things to be thinking about when you're trying to set your API. You've heard a lot about ADA today, and it's not just physically where the ramp is. You also have to consider, well, somebody has to build that ramp. We need a little extra room around that. Do we have enough right-of-way? We want to make sure we've considered that. Traffic detours. Let's say you're going to close the road in order to be able to build that improvement, and you're going to route traffic all the way around some other location. Well, now your project area impact has gotten bigger because you have to figure out the effects of that traffic. Maybe we're thinking about running some of our traffic down a county road. Well, one of the first things that counties usually do is said, show me the money because you're going to run your traffic on my road and I want to get it repaved. Okay, you might hurt my road. Temporary pedestrian access routes, TPARs. Let's say we got a construction area and we have to tell pedestrians that you can't come through here right now, so you need to follow this alternate route. And it could be across the street, back on some other street, and back around. And of course, if we route pedestrians through there, we'd have to say, gee, Is it ADA accessible? Do they have all the right ramps there? Oh, gee, the project just got bigger. And you have to follow that and make sure that you've accounted for all those types of things. Stormwater treatment areas. When we do highway improvements, particularly when we create additional impervious surface and other activities, it might trigger the need to treat all that stormwater runoff. Sometimes we can do it right along the side of the highway where we're operating. But other times, there's not enough room. And so we might have to look for an alternative location. And that facility might sit a half mile down the road. Well, now that means your area of project impact also includes that as well. Utility locations. Generally, there are utilities located in our highway right-of-way. They may be crossing or somewhere in that area, and they might have to be moved. So we have to keep that in mind. During construction, we have to pay attention to access and grading. It's not just the width of the highway that we're working on. If it's on a fill, the embankments may go way out to the side, and that also is the area of impact. We have to think about things like how are we going to maintain that in the future? We build these projects, we turn them over to maintenance, and it's their job forever to maintain it. And we have to be thinking and getting their input. How are they going to get down there to mow it? How are they going to get down to that feature and maintain it in the future? Does it need some sort of a permanent access road down there? Oh, your project area just got bigger. And you have to consider right-of-way. Permanent right-of-way that we're always going to need, or perhaps it's just temporary during construction. Are we getting enough? Are we thinking about what that might be? I worked on a project where we had to relocate all these utilities out of the center of the road and move them to the side. And everybody forgot about the guy wires for all these poles. And so we got all the right-of-way for it, and then it dawned on somebody that, hey, you know what? These poles all need guide wires. And so we had to go back and buy more right-of-way for all these poles. So you have to be thinking about items like that. Here's an example of a project in Region 2. It's the South Yamhill River Bridge. I just want to use this to continue to talk about this idea of API. You can see in the big box on the screen the area where the bridge is located. So imagine if we first had said, okay, we know what this project's all about. We're going to build that bridge, and we're going to close half the bridge, and we're going to replace one half and then flip the traffic over and do the other side. And so everybody says, okay, that's the project. We're feeling good about it. But you didn't really look into it enough, and now you've passed DAP, you're working on it, and then Clayton, Mr. Bridge here, says, oh, you know what? We can't do it that way. We're going to need a bridge next to our old bridge, and we're going to put traffic on there during construction, and we're going to tear down the bridge and build a new one. Oh, gee, well, that's a little different than what we originally thought. We're going to need a bigger project footprint. And so we get working on there, and we said, okay, now we're sure we know what it is. So you turn the environmental folks loose, and they start getting all the permits arranged, and people are buying right-of-way. Make sure we've got it, because you've got this detour bridge sitting right next to your new bridge. And then you get a little farther along, and somebody says, oh, you know what? We didn't check into that environmental thing. We can't do that. So now it's like, well, what are we going to do? Well, I guess we'll close the road. So you just threw away all that work on the right-of-way. You threw away all that work on your permitting, and you decided you're going to route traffic all the way around this way, back through downtown, and that's how you're going to do it. And at that point, then you say, all right, well, now my project of area of project impact now includes that entire detour route and everything else. So you could redo work over and over again if you haven't really thought it through, which is why DAP is that critical decision point in the design process. So again, it follows the project initiation phase, and then when you're certain and you've got that high degree of confidence, you can say you're a DAP, and then other activities can move forward. Your environmental and other permitting, your right-of-way purchasing and acquisition, and you can move forward to your contract design documents.
So that's kind of an introduction to DAP and some of the things that we're going to be doing leading up to DAP. So the importance of DAP, this is an important tool in the life of the project delivery life cycle. Like Jim says, it establishes that geometric footprint. It's making those decisions on the project. We did have and continue. I mean, it's a continual struggle to protect against scope creep, to protect against rework. Early in my career, we used to track rework with a separate activity code. And so you'd be running 3-page timesheets, and that wasn't much fun. But it was important back then, 25 years ago, that we were tracking the rework in the section I was at, that we're trying to narrow that down. So over the years, there's been a number of efforts that we've engaged in at ODOT in order to try to get to that firm scope, to provide that certainty that moving forward, that this is the project we're working on. Some of the things I was recalling when we were putting this together was something called approved design. We had a pins down initiative. We had a confirmed design. Some people had a 30%, kind of lead into DAP. But the idea is that we've been trying to get to that point and develop a commitment tool that says this is the project moving forward. This is what we all agree to. And we're able to make some assurance that when we start working on the project, that we're not going to be looping back. But that's going to require us to make some informed decisions and make sure everybody's at the table as part of that. So we'll be talking about that as PDII rolls out in each region, and the staff gets to learn what's exactly going to go into DAP. But really, the whole idea though is we're going to try to minimize the problem of scope creep, condensed timelines. When you have a change in the project and you got to redesign. I used to be the person in right-of-way with a short timeline that had 90 days to work a miracle and get onto some property. And the same thing with environmental permitting. You have a footprint, you figure out how much cut and fill you have, what your impact is going to be to the aquatic arena. You reach out to your regulators, you're halfway through that, and you're like, oops, nope, we need to shift this, more fill, going in, or we're going to now, need to affect a potential ARCI resource that you weren't engaged in early in the life of the project. And then going forward after DAP, I like to think of DAP as, like I said earlier, a commitment tool. You've got district at the table agreeing to the life of the project. You have the area, at the table committing to the funding and the timeline. You have each of the technical disciplines saying, yep, bridge is happy with this, environmental's happy with this, survey's got a good footprint, they know where they're going to work. Hydraulics is on board, and everybody's there, and they're saying, this is it. It's like the big pinky swear, is how I think of it. So we're all in it. So the DAP acceptance process this is really simplified to kind of 5 basic steps. There's a lot that leads up into it. So when I say develop DAP deliverables, there's a lot that goes into that. So the DAP deliverables, that you're developing your plans, you're developing the API like Jim had talked about, making sure that we're being informed about it and make sure that we're not missing a piece of the puzzle, that when we're looking at it, we're looking at it from different angles, making sure that we've looked at all the potential outfalls, routes, borrow sources, everything that you can think of that needs to be looked at. You're being intentional about that and making sure you have that footprint set. I've been guilty in the past, when I'm under a deadline for a schedule, that maybe one unit was overworked and you didn't have enough time to get a consultant contract in place, because that takes about 6 months, and you're behind schedule, and it's pretty easy just to slide through DAP and say, oh, hydraulics isn't here, we'll just give me an assumption, okay, $1.5 million, that'll take care of it. So you're rolling, and you get down to final plans, and hydraulics slides in and says, oh, $3.5 million. Like, what? You're making some assumptions and carrying the project forward, and you get a big shock at the end. And that's hard on the heart. That causes, cardiac issues to try to deal with a $2 million shortfall at the last minute. And, nobody likes that. So when we're developing our DAP deliverables, we have to make sure that everybody's at the table, we're not missing anything, that, and if we're missing something, then, maybe it isn't, time to move the project forward. But there's that natural pressure to try to hold the schedule because, there's other projects coming along behind, and as you slide a project, it just makes the snowball a little bit bigger. And so we'll have to be really good about making sure that everybody's gotten their deliverables ready on time and be able to review the package together as a team. An important part of DAP also is the DAP quality control review. Do we have enough time to take a look at the project and the deliverables that we're putting out and make sure that it meets the technical standards for the discipline that we're working in? And then after that, is the design acceptance workshop. So we've developed our deliverables, given it to our roadway and specs. They're putting the package together. The project leader's putting out the review set for everybody to take a look at. And so also, this is one of those things in the past that it was pretty easy sometimes to pencil whip. You just go, yeah, it looks good enough. But, say this happens during construction season and your, assistant project manager or, construction coordinator, has been out paving all night. They're not that crazy about coming in during the day and reviewing plans and giving comments. And so sometimes you slide past that. Well, you can have a real constructability issue, develop during that project, and you can carry that forward if you're not taking a good look, at the plans before that workshop. So to have a good design acceptance workshop, you need to make sure that, of course, the tech center and the technical disciplines are looking at it and they're comfortable with the product, comfortable with maintenance taking a look at the project. Sometimes that's a challenge, getting maintenance to the table. But I think that they're really committed now to want to be there and provide that review on the project because, as we've heard earlier, maintenance owns that project. We get it for a short period of time. We start thinking about it when we start developing the STIP like Mike talked about. We start working on it here. The folks in this room have it for a period of time for 18 months to a couple of years, when we're designing and delivering it. Construction has it for the summer. And then after that, if it's a structure, they've got it for the next 75 years before, we're looking at major changes to that. So we want to make sure that they've gotten that input in the design so that they don't have, well, we have a facility out in Hermiston that is like our poster child of, maintenance not, getting what they wanted. And we've got a filter facility for, stormwater treatment that everybody hates. And so it's been a good teaching tool, though, for the last, 15 years, because we all point to that, treatment facility over on Elm. And it's a reminder, it's like, if you don't want another one of those, you need to get to the table and tell us that this is not doable. So the design acceptance workshop, everybody's at the table. We're looking at the plans, we're getting our comments in. And that's the time where, everybody's there. We've agreed this is the footprint. This is the scope. This is when we're going to, move forward with. These are the areas we have some concerns we need to mitigate. But at the end of the day, and this kind of depends on each region, you might actually just have a signature page or a signature from each of the disciplines saying, yep, we're on board. Hydraulics is on board. Bridge is on board. Geotech is good with it. Maintenance is good with it. Construction's good with it. And then the tech center manager and the area manager at the end, are comfortable that everybody that's worked on the project is on board with the project moving forward. After that workshop, clean up your final comments, and then we get to the DAP certification. And that DAP certification used to be hit or miss. Some regions would do it, some regions wouldn't. But now that we're moving forward with PDII, that's going to be a standard practice for everybody across the board. We're going to go through a formal certification process by which the tech center manager, the area manager, and the project sponsor, or whoever's paying for it, they're on board with that project, and they're signing off on that, and they're certifying that everything that's due at DAP is complete and in project-wise, and that through the process of developing that project, we've looked at those things that are going to be potential tripping hazards for the project going forward. Now, it's not saying that everything has to be 100% complete, because it's very rare to have one project that's 100% complete. You might have some things that are missing, but you got a good mitigation plan that you're going to go through in order to address that issue and make sure that it's resolved by the time we get to PS&E. So that's kind of the high-level view of the DAP acceptance process. Moving forward, we're going to have about 19 deliverables, 18 if you do things right. But some of the major deliverables we have right now, from the project leader, you're going to get the DAP certification letter and the mobility considerations checklist. Roadway's going to develop the DAP narrative. I think that process is going to change going forward. Everybody's going to put their pieces into project-wise into the form for their respective discipline. Everybody's going to have a hand in developing the DAP plan sheets, estimates, and in their QC process, making sure that's complete. The spec writer is going to work with construction to develop the construction schedule. The traffic control designer is going to make sure that the work zone decision tree and the draft TMP are in place. We talked a little bit about access management in the previous presentation, but we're going to have that access management strategy in place. And if you can go as far as having the OPAL in place, that's great. The REC, the Region Environmental Coordinator, is going to have either their categorical exclusion in place, or if they're working, a programmatic categorical exclusion in place, or they're going to be working towards the CE and have a real good understanding of what regulatory issues or permitting issues they need to work through in order to get to DAP. If you happen to have any rail orders, does everybody know what rail orders are?
Probably not.
Okay, so we're mostly a delivery organization, but there is one part of the organization, in addition to motor carriers, that's also a regulatory piece of the agency, and that's around rail safety. So rail and public transit, they fall under HALGARD right now. They regulate the safety features, within a zone of influence around rail crossings. And it's quite a process to go through to get a rail order in place, because you're going to satisfy our internal regulators. They're going to make sure that the slope, the grade coming off of the rail to the adjacent roadway and the spacing for the signs and stop bars and all that fits their safety criteria. But we're also working through agreement with Union Pacific Railroad or any of the railroads, and that's quite a process getting through that. So it's a big lift to get a rail order in place, but it's a legally enforceable order that we have to have. That anytime you're modifying anything around a rail crossing, you either need to modify an existing one or develop a new one if it's a new facility.
Can I make a comment on
Yeah.
that? So just to comment on rail orders, it's a lengthy process to get the rail order all finished up, all the paperwork done and approved. And basically it says, this is what we're going to do, ODOT, this is what the railroad's going to do, and everybody agrees to it. And where this can totally unravel is if you're not at DAP. And you get way into the design and you're near advanced plans and somebody says, that's not going to work like that. We've got to make a change. Well, you don't get to just make a change right by the railroad. You get to go back and reopen your rail order and go through it and do it again. And because you can't just, and for insignificant little things, it could be a pull box owned by the railroad sitting right there and you say, oh, that's right in my ADA ramp. I've got to move it. Well, you can't just move it. You got to go back to the rail order and have them put it in the rail order that's got to be moved. So again, that's why DAP is such a big deal.
Thank you. That's you can't reinforce how much trouble that is to modify. So, and the last piece of the deliverables, just at a high level, is any design exceptions or design deviations. If you haven't got those in place or started laying the groundwork with that, with the technical, with the roadway folks, or I'll take it as far as traffic approvals. If you're going to put down a traffic signal and you don't have your warrants, you're kind of getting the cart really before the horse, and you may not have the warrant for that. I'd like to say I've never been in that position, but I have, and it's not much fun to go back and try to modify something that big on the fly. So at DAP, if you don't have that work done to either get your design exceptions. And of course with ADA, you know, a good portion of every ramp, or a good portion of the ramps on every project are going to have some sort of a design exception. But if you don't have that in the works or in hand, you know, there's a big potential that you're going to go back and redesign. And then that kind of starts the rework thing again. So when it's all said and done, you know, we're working towards ADAPT certification. And the certification, like I said, is an assurance, you know, or a certification or a statement going forward saying that we have done everything at DAP that we're supposed to have done. We've looked at the project, we understand the project, we know what it's going to take to deliver it from now to a final set of contract, you know, documents. We have a good footprint. You know, we know where the right-of-way takings are going to need to be. We know that this is the environmental situation we're going to be working with, and these are the permits we need to have, and this is the API or APE that we're working within, and that we can move forward without risk of delivery, you know, down the road. Now, the exception to this is if we do have an area that maybe isn't firmed up, that we need to work on. This is where we identify that risk, and then we manage that risk going forward. But it's an intentional process of looking at that project and fully understanding where you're at as you move out of that project development phase like David talked about, where you're looking at the different alternatives, you're kind of proofing it, making sure that this is going to work, to the time you say now we're getting into production design and, you know, obtaining the permits, obtaining the right-of-way, and moving forward to the contract documents at PS&E. So this gets signed, like I said, by the tech center manager like Jim, you know, an area manager like me, and whoever's paying for it. So, you know, if it's a pavements job, you know, we're going to send it to Justin Madre, you know, and have him sign that. If it's a bridge job, Bert Hartman, you know, he runs the checkbook for the bridge section. And for me, when we get done with DAP, this is what it feels like to me. You know, it's when you got a plan that comes together. Now, okay, someone used this photo on another presentation a while back, and there was I guess a generational issue here. Does everybody know who this guy is? I'm getting a lot of no's, okay. So who remembers, you guys watch the A-Team? Okay, all right, this is from the A-Team. So he's happy, he's smoking his cigar, which we can't do at work, and but he just loves it when a plan comes together, so.
I think that was what, in the 90s or something?
It might have been the 80s
Maybe older,
even.
I don't even know. Anyway.
There's a guy driving around LeGrand with an A-Team fan. I love it.
It was probably his dream.
Yep.
No. So we talked about DAP earlier. The DAP that we described is the DAP of today. But David Kim talked about, he used the word hot off the press. Okay, DAP is changing. So in just a few weeks, there'll be a few changes to DAP that you should anticipate, and we'll probably have a little bit of growing pain as we switch to this DAP 2.0, or what we have called DAP 2.0. So I just mostly want you to be aware of it, to recognize that there are going to be some changes in the works, that it will affect you. Will affect not only the deliverable, but will also affect the way things are scheduled. So some of these elements always got done, but they occurred at a different time. And so now some of these things have been moved up, and they need to happen at DAP. And so David mentioned the creation of the DAP phase gate, which basically means if you don't have all those things done, we're stopped until they get done, okay? Or we decide to allow some sort of an exception. We think, okay, the risk is super low, we can go ahead and keep moving. But unless if we don't have those items completed, we're stuck at that point in the process, and we cannot continue. So one of those items is a completed project charter that basically says, here's how we're going to get all that done. That has to happen. We're going to do legal descriptions for the right-of-way that we're going to buy. We usually did that right after we signed off on DAP, but now we're saying we want legal descriptions done before we sign off. That basically gives us an even greater confidence level of knowing if we have to buy right-of-way, what's it going to look like. We also have to have a baseline schedule, which means, remember how I talked about that we had a high level of certainty that our scope, schedule, and budget weren't going to change because you know everything there is to know about the project. So at that point at DAP, we're going to basically take another snapshot of the schedule and say, from here moving out, really all we're doing is just some basic stuff. We're putting the plan set together, we're buying the right-of-way, we're getting the permits. But those are all kind of known things that we're going to do. And so we take that snapshot in order to be able to see at the end of the project, how well did we do? Because we were saying at DAP that we really have a great handle on the project. Okay? We still sign off with the area manager and the tech center manager. We have concurrence by the state project delivery manager, which is David Kim. Okay? And we do have an escalation or an exception process if for some reason we want to keep moving and there's some little item of low risk that's kind of got us hung up. One of the things I'll mention is you've heard the word ProjectWise. I think most everybody here is familiar with ProjectWise or you're currently using it. If you may even been bugged by not using the naming tool or putting things in ProjectWise with the wrong name or the wrong location. There's a reason to some of that emphasis, and one is that we want to make sure that our files are named correctly and they're in the right folders because ProjectWise has the ability to do an automated query and look for certain documents. And so David Kim, for example, he will run that query and say, are all the DAP deliverables in the right folders and are they complete? Okay, so he can do that if you've named them correctly and put them in the right folders. If you haven't, he runs the query and says, looks like you're not at DAP, we're stuck. So there's a reason for that, so I encourage you to use the tool, get them in the right folders because that'll help the process as we go along. So just a couple more items. Again, we've talked about the footprint. We want to have that assurance that we're not going to have to redo work. I mentioned had the picture of the bridge project, and I made up stuff about some hypotheticals. Well, on that project, we did have a problem. It wasn't the ones I described, but on that project, we started on it, and we didn't do enough investigation in the geotechnical side of the project. Okay? So we thought we knew what the bridge was going to look like, but we shortchanged the geo part of it. As we got into the project farther, we realized we had a liquefaction problem for the bridge. Okay? So we ended up, there were a couple decisions. One was, well, I guess we could reinforce the earth at the base of the bridge, and that would be one way to do it. Well, the problem was there's a conservation easement that runs right next to the bridge, and we couldn't get the right-of-way. So it was like, okay, that's a non-starter. That's not going to work for us. But we hadn't really investigated it fully at DAP. So then it was like, okay, I guess we'll have to reinforce the bridge. We'll have to change the bridge design in order to be able to take up that and make sure it's stable during an earthquake. So the bridge now, I think we're on about the third version of that bridge. And we had to redo that work because we failed to fully investigate enough information to really know what our footprint was. Okay, so I made stuff up in my example, but that's what really happened on the project, and that's the reason why we really want to do those investigations. You heard about the change management process. We do CMRs for budget, but we also do them for schedules. Let's say we get behind, some unanticipated thing happened on the project, so if we're going to significantly change the schedule, we might have to do a CMR for that. So we want to make sure that we're following our schedule and we're getting those done. This DAP is all about risk, or is a lot about risk, and trying to make sure that we're managing that and making sure that we're adequately considering that. But once we're at DAP, we get to move forward with our contract plans, which is PS&E. So I believe that's all we had for our presentation. If you have questions, we'd be happy to try to answer them.
want to take that, or you want me?
You can start if you'd like.
Okay. You know, project schedule templates are just a template. And so, you know, I think as you get into the project, as you're validating your scope at the beginning of the project, you know, we saw that soft kickoff or a core team kickoff. You know, that group of people that are working on that project can help, you know, as a team inform what that schedule is going to look like. And then, you know, the project leader or project manager is going to adjust that schedule. But getting to the checklist, you know, we've got a standard checklist now that we're going to have coming out of the PDII effort that, you know, at DAP, you know, we're going to hit the major things like the plan sheets, the cost estimate, specifications, exceptions, deviations, access management, quality control review, or, you know, quality control, you know, processes in the regions, IGAs that need to be revised, STIP amendments that need to be revised. Those are the things that we're going to have at a basic level. Backing that up is the scoping narrative, you know, that it'll be standardized, you know, across the board, that everybody will be working towards trying to fill out that background information on there. So as we're kicking off the project, you know, there'll be that, you know, determination on your project, what you're going to have. So if it's a pretty straightforward project, you may not have geotech activities, or you may not have hydraulics, and so you can cut some of that out. Or, you know, maybe it's particularly complex, you know, as you're going through your work breakdown structure, and you need to add a little more time in there in order to, you know, say, set a component drill rig to do some particularly steep drilling, you know, for the geotech. You'll add more time in there. So that's how that'll inform the schedule on a project-by-project basis, you know, going forward.
I appreciate that. The thing I would add is that as designers and people working on projects, keep in mind that fundamental thing that you saw on those words on the racetrack that I showed early in the presentation, which is whatever it takes to have that high level of confidence in your design that the scope, schedule, and budget are not going to have to change. And so as for your particular discipline, you have to think about that, and as a member of the PDT, you have to bring that to the attention of the team, including your project leaders. So you have to ask yourself that question, am I confident that it's not going to change? And if you're not confident, then we might have to add something. We have standard DAP deliverables that try to ask all the questions and uncover the issues, but they're not going to cover everything, and there may not be something on there. And so you have to represent that discipline and make sure that we haven't overlooked it. And let me offer another example. Let's say you're doing a project, you're doing a road widening, and you pretty much figured out your cut and fill for the highway itself, and then somebody says, you know, we're probably going to have to do noise walls. Okay, so then somebody puts on the, you know, in plan view says, okay, this is where the noise wall's going to go. And you stop there and you say, okay, I think we're at DAP, we're ready to go. Well, nobody checked the geotech stuff. Nobody tracked the cut and fills for the noise wall. And now all of a sudden you realize after DAP, oh, you know what? There's some slide thing going on right there where we wanted to put the wall, or the fill extends out of our right-of-way. That's the kind of stuff where you were close, but you didn't take the design quite far enough. You didn't model the design for the wall. You did it for the road, but you didn't do it for the wall. And so you got caught off guard. You're after DAP, and then you go, okay, I guess we're going to have to buy more right-of-way. We have to change our right-of-way descriptions. And we've already talked to the owner. We had agreement that this is how much we're going to buy, and now we're going back again and saying, sorry, we were wrong. Now we need 5 more feet of your property, and that's very frustrating for the owners, and there's all this rework. So again, we try to have standard deliverables, and they try to cover the majority of things that are going to come up on a project, but you as the technical experts need to be thinking and asking that question, you know, have I done enough to have that high degree of confidence? Other questions?
It's not about DAP. I'm just more concerned about, curious, what's an area manager and how do you fit into the agency? I mean, I've been here for 3 years and I just learned this today. So.
He's like, yeah, what do you do, right?
Yeah,
What's your
I
purpose in life?
I get asked that at dinner parties. So if you look at the division of kind of the duties, within a region, you've got the region manager, they're responsible for everything under their geographical area. If you break up the operations and maintenance, that goes to your district managers. And then project delivery, that goes to the area managers, so they're responsible for scope, schedule, and budget. And also construction. And then within that, or also under the region manager, you have the tech center manager who's responsible for the technical disciplines and the quality of that. So if you think about it from the work product, everybody in this room is working on the work product. The area manager is responsible for project delivery, looking at the program at large. Okay.
And I would say, I would add to that, if I may, is that if you can imagine that the areas and the area manager own the projects, okay? They're responsible for the projects, and they have a couple ways of delivering those projects. One is they could go get a consultant and do it, and a lot of our projects get delivered that way. Or they go to the tech centers, and the tech center represent the in-house consultant, if you will, or the in-house arm of project delivery. So they own the projects. Tech centers are the resources that get assigned to his project leader to help get it done.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, everybody get 80%? I think it's lunchtime. Diane, anything? We're a little early.
We are a little early. This is awesome. So this means you get a little bit longer of a lunch break. So thank you, unless there's any other questions. No? Okay, so we are coming back at 12:30, correct? 12:30 on the dot. You see now I have a border collie out there to help me out. So, okay. Network a little bit more, maybe ask Ken and Jim a couple more questions. So anyway, back here at 12:30.
Did you have a question? It's like we have one more question. Yeah.
I just wanted to know how you printed slide 8.
Oh, there's a question on how we printed slide 8. So I think Diane can tell you that. Diane helped us get the printing done. Thanks.
All right.
All right, thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.